Again. So recently I booked flights to go home to Ireland for the Christmas holidays. And as I was entering my details and going through the booking process, I was asked if I would like to offset the carbon emitted from taking the flight. It wasn't the first time I was offered this option by an airline, and I ticked the box, as I usually do, to make myself feel a little bit less guilty about my unsustainable choices. That little box at the end of the booking process promises to compensate for the CO2 emitted from my flight by reducing emissions somewhere else. Today, I would like to discuss if we can really just buy our way out of increasing our carbon footprint like this. So, we all know that hopping on a plane is one of the worst things you can do as an individual for the environment. I'll give you an example to help you to visualize the impact of taking a flight. Taking a return flight from London to New York is like melting 7 meters squared of Arctic ice. That's 7 meters squared per person. So when you think of a whole plane full of passengers and how many planes fly on that route every day, that's a lot of ice. We can't really underestimate how much taking a few flights a year adds to our personal carbon footprint. So therefore, if taking a flight is unavoidable or feels like something you're not willing to give up, if you live on an island like me, sometimes it seems necessary. The idea that you can mitigate the effects from the emissions of the flight seems to be a great solution. It's definitely an appealing proposition, a promise that for a trivial amount of money, it's usually €2 or €3, you can just go about your business with no climate guilt. But if it sounds too good to be true, that's because, at least for now, it is. So, how exactly does carbon offsetting work? Carbon offsets offer a way to balance out your pollution by investing in projects that reduce emissions of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. For example, if you're taking a long haul flight from London to New York, you can purchase a carbon offset to account for that specific environmental impact. Carbon dioxide has the same impact on the climate no matter where it is emitted. So, if a ton of carbon dioxide can be absorbed from the atmosphere in one part of the world, it can cancel out a ton of gas emitted in another part of the world. So, in theory, individuals can cancel out the impact of some of their emissions by investing in these projects that reduce or store carbon. Some examples of these are forest preservation and tree planting. However, a key part of carbon offsetting is the idea of additionality. This means that a carbon offset needs to fund reductions that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So this means if you pay someone to preserve a forest, but they were never actually planning to cut down that forest, then you're not offsetting your emissions. As you can imagine, it's difficult to establish the facts in these cases with the level of accuracy needed for offset programs to work given the climate crisis. And it's just too difficult to measure the emissions that are actually reduced. The goals of carbon offsetting schemes that airlines offer all sound really great. Like I mentioned, planting trees and forest preservation. Ryanair, for example, has selected several carbon offsetting initiatives for its passengers. These include a wind farm in Turkey, a reforestation project in the Algarve in Portugal, and the distribution of energy efficient cooking stoves in Uganda. These all sound like great projects, I'm sure you'll agree, if they're implemented properly and if there is accountability. However, it seems that most carbon offset programs are not achieving their aims. In a 2016 study, The European Commission found that 85% of the projects it examined were unlikely to achieve their aims. A 2019 investigation found that forest preservation projects hadn't offset the amount of pollution they were supposed to, or they had brought about gains that were then quickly reversed. Take up for carbon offsetting is also surprisingly low amongst air passengers, which perhaps suggests that people don't trust that the money that they give to airlines will actually go into mitigating the impact of the emissions from the flight. According to the IATA, the International Air Transport Association, only around 5% of passengers pay the few extra euro to offset their flight. 5% of passengers is unlikely to make a huge difference, and therefore better transparency is needed for air passengers to trust that their money will go to the right projects and actually offset their emissions. Some activists have criticized carbon offsetting as an excuse to continue polluting. Many argue that it does nothing to change our behavior. Part of the appeal of carbon offsets is the idea that it's possible to combat climate change while continuing to live our lives the way we always have. But in light of how ineffective many of the programs have been found to be, many say that this carbon offsetting offered by airlines is really just greenwashing on the part of airlines. If people think that there's a way to fly, to take flights and not increase their overall carbon footprint, then they're more likely to fly more, which is exactly what the airlines want. So I think that airlines will continue to offer you lots of options when you're booking a flight. There will be a box to upgrade your seat, there will be a box to add extra baggage, and there will be a box to cancel your greenhouse gas emissions. And if this seems too simple, it's because it is. At the end of the day, we as individuals can only do our best. It's up to governments and big companies to make the real changes needed. However, even after reading all of that, I will probably continue to tick the box for carbon offsets when I fly, in the hope that for the price of a cup of coffee, at least some of the emissions from my flights might be offset somewhere. But it's very clear that this is not the answer to all of our climate problems. Thank you.